was the regular-looking house that harbored a nightmare still haunting Leeds detectives and residents today. John Taylor had always been the weird guy in his neighborhood. Some people had heard that he liked to torment the animals that he poached. It takes a real douchebag to prey on innocent souls like this, everyone knows. But with just a rumor, people could not report him to the authorities. They just talked about him. He was the type of person that creeped out his neighbors just by passing by them. Some people did visit John at his home though. They weren't very close to him, nobody was, but everyone noticed the same thing. Around August 2001, a big upright freezer from his kitchen disappeared. It was yet another oddity about this creepy looking man. No one thought much of it, but when Leanne Tiernan's face was plastered all over the news that month, they put two and two together. You see, although Leanne had been missing for 9 months, her body was found almost in perfect condition, wrapped in several layers. There was almost no decomposition. Their neighbor was the monster that had taken her life. He'd preserved her in his freezer. She was his trophy, and she would have never left his home had his freezer not broken down. This was just the tip of the iceberg. John Taylor was nothing short of evil, and poor Leanne had to pay with her life in order to put this monster in prison. This is the full case of Leanne Tiernan. In August 2001, a man named Mark Beeson was walking his dog through a wooded area in Leeds, UK. It was a brisk morning and he was alone, so he had a big knot in his stomach when he saw a big package just laying there in the forest. Mark phoned 999, the emergency services in the UK. He asked for officers. He knew he wasn't supposed to open the package himself.
I got the call in the afternoon, and I was told that a girl's body had been found at Lindley Woods.
It wasn't easy to get 16-year-old Leanne Tiernan's body out of the package. She was wrapped in so many layers that DCI Chris Gregg described the site as a Russian doll. Now, Leanne's family needed to know what happened. They'd been looking for their girl for 9 whole months. The whole state of Yorkshire had been looking for her, and her loved ones had lost all hope. Now, a shattering piece of news would begin a harrowing investigation, which would lead to a sinister man who should have been put in prison long ago. Leanne was only his last victim. In her death, she would expose John Taylor for the monster he truly was. On November 26, 2000, Leanne and her friend Sarah Whitehouse went Christmas shopping at Leeds City Centre.
We've been shopping and we were having a laugh about boyfriends, usual stuff. Leanne, she was very generous. She spent her last money on me. She borrowed the money so she could get my Christmas presents.
The 16-year-old girls had to be home by 5 o'clock that day, so before it was dark, they hopped on a bus and rode 3 miles to their neighborhood. Once out, they parted ways, and Leanne took a shortcut through the wooded valley. It was supposed to be a 5-minute walk home, but she never made it. Throughout the night, this is what her mother Sharon heard.
Hi, it's Leanne. I can't get to the phone right now. Call back later. Bye.
The more she heard this simple voice recording, the more she spiraled. They hadn't had a fight. Leanne had no reason to ignore her or run away from home. Something awful must have happened. So before the night was over, Sharon called the Leeds PD and reported her daughter missing. And on the morning of November 27th, many of Leanne's friends, schoolmates, and neighbors were also out looking for her.
She was the nuttiest person you could ever met. Just before Leanne went missing, we went to Turkey in the summer. So like the biggest last memory that I had of her was 2 weeks abroad, having a good old time. She was my best friend. She had like a gift, a big sunshine.
Hello! Welcome to my talk show.
Leanne's friends were in shambles. They knew what a missing person case meant. They were old enough to figure Leanne was in grave danger if she was still alive. However, the detectives were surprised to see Leanne was not the type to get into trouble. In the experience of Chief Detective Chris Gregg, missing girls in the area came from vulnerable backgrounds or disrupted families. Leanne came from neither. Her parents were divorced, but she had a stable family life with her mom and sister.
The last memory of Leanne I have is when she was setting off to go shopping and she kissed me on the cheek and she laughed because she got lipstick on me again, and she was always doing that.
Chris Gregg knew something else. The authorities had to act super fast if they were to find Leanne alive.
Girls disappear regularly and thankfully are safely found. And we realise from past experience with cases that you can't afford delay. If you are hoping that there's going to be a successful outcome, you've got to act quickly.
Sadly, they didn't know Leanne was already gone. Chris called for backup. The National Crime Faculty joined in on the search, scouring every inch between that bus stop and Leanne's home. The first thing Detective Adam Gregory noticed was that the wooded area Leanne cut through was straight out of a horror movie.
When I first visited Huffley Gill, it just strikes you as an awful place to be. It's shrouded by bushes and overgrown on both sides, and it's one of those places that I suppose most people would try and avoid unless they had reason to go there.
Within 2 days, 200 officers were working on the case. To this day, it's one of the biggest cases in Yorkshire PD's history. But by now, most detectives knew that they were probably looking at a murder case. Sadly, this is what stats indicate. When 48 hours have passed in a missing child or teenager case, the odds are not in their favor. Leanne's dad remembers that horrible feeling of dread.
There were times when we were feeling pretty much down that she may have been taken and killed, but we really couldn't let ourselves or allow ourselves to believe that.
While Leanne's neighborhood was scoured to no avail, detectives also questioned everyone in her life.
All of a sudden you're getting pulled in to do press things. You're being questioned by the police because you're all suspects, friends, family, everybody's a suspect. And it's a total nightmare, really.
But without any evidence in sight, detectives could not question Leanne's loved ones forever. The interrogations had died down by the summer of 2001 when Michael and Sharon received that fateful call.
I can't really remember much about was the point when the police actually came to tell us about it all. It's like watching TV and it's happening to somebody else. It just feels so unreal. It don't feel like it's you that's sitting there.
Leanne's cause of death was listed as strangulation, but as there were so many types of cables and collars around her body, it was hard to determine what had happened. However, these cables said something else too.
In this case, you had 6, 7, 8 different items, all of which could give some sort of potential investigative direction. Any one of those could lead to the offender.
So the forensic team took the cables and collars one by one and examined the material, make, and manufacturer. Another cable had a small fiber from a red carpet attached to it. Now the detectives were zeroing in on the suspect. He was a postal worker with a red carpet at home. And although 9 months had passed since Leanne had been taken away, authorities were still aware they had to act fast.
I think there was a great deal of fear during the investigation, particularly given that there'd been a 9-month gap before we'd actually discovered the body. Of what else could this person have done or be about to do? And once it appeared that that body had been moved from one location, probably a freezer, to Linley Woods, then there was a suggestion that has this body been moved so that there's now room for another victim.
Speaking of Lindley Woods, Chris Gregg knew this from previous cases. Killers don't dump their victims randomly. Leanne's killer was probably familiar with this area. So, Chris Gregg asked the public to call with any clues. Do they know anyone familiar with that forest who they suspected could do something this heinous? A woman named Deborah had met a man through a dating app a few years back. And guess where he'd taken her?
I received 2 replies, and one was from a man called John. We used to go out doing a bit of game shooting and rabbiting. We used to go do a bit of fishing in the stream, and that was up at Linley Woods itself.
But Deborah didn't piece the puzzle together for a long time. She only called after the authorities announced a breakthrough. And this had come from the forensic team. Remember, there was also a dog collar on Leanne's neck. This one was harder to track. There was no manufacturer number on it. The team had to go another way.
We asked Armitage to supply us with a list of every retailer that they supplied that model dog collar to.
After a seemingly endless search, detectives stumbled upon a Leeds man who had bought 6 collars from a Liverpool supplier. And when they ran John Taylor's name through their database, they discovered he lived just a few blocks away from Leanne's family. They discovered something else. John Taylor worked for the Parcel Force, which is part of the Royal Mail. When the Leeds PD turned up at John Taylor's home with a search warrant, they did not expect half of it. The house looked abandoned, and the smell inside was indescribable. The carpets had been removed, there was an unplugged toilet in the living room, and pet cages and apparel, but no pets. However, when the forensic team went through the backyard, they discovered several animal skeletons, 28 ferrets, and 4 dogs. It was the stuff of nightmares. Even before gathering up the evidence and testing it for DNA, the detectives knew they had their suspect.
We found dog collars that matched the type of dog collar that was around Leanne's neck. We also found amongst the pallets in the gardens used cable ties that, when they were examined closely, matched the type of cable ties that had been around Leanne's wrists.
When Chris Gregg spoke to John's neighbors, they uncovered his nickname, the Pet Man. On the one hand, people said that they often saw John with dogs and ferrets. He also sold pet food to people in his neighborhood and was always out walking his dogs. On the other hand, some people have heard that he was also a cruel poacher. John Taylor was a 44-year-old divorcee who lived alone. He and his wife had split up 4 years before, and their 2 children were with their mom. He'd always loved hunting. His friends knew that he was into hunting foxes and rabbits in the nearby woods, and yep, Lindy Woods was his favorite hunting ground. Ever since his divorce, John had been on numerous dating websites and had even traveled the country for one-night stands. Knowing his background, the detectives ventured to guess a dark fact. John was a serial predator, so they sought out his ex-girlfriends, and unfortunately their hunches were true. John took pleasure in inflicting pain on others, in particular animals and women. He would force his partners into scary scenarios, and they always felt unsafe with him. What began as play often ended up with tight ties and physical violence. And once, he had told one of his exes that he wanted to sleep with his neighbor's 15-year-old daughter. While the detectives were linking John Taylor to Leanne's unaliving, they also uncovered countless cases of unsolved homicide and missing person cases, all linked to the same monster. In 1992, Yvonne Fitt's lifeless body was found in a shallow grave in Linley Woods. 2 years later, Lindsay Jo Rimmer disappeared. Another 2 years later, Deborah Wood was unalived and dumped in a wooded area. And in 2001, Rebecca Hall's body was found in a shady alley in Bradford. It's such a scary moment when you realize you've been missing a monster for a decade. John Taylor had been terrorizing innocent souls, human or not, and getting away with it for too long. In September 2001, Taylor was finally arrested and taken in for questioning. He was the one who snatched Leanne from Howley Jail that November afternoon.
And while he was there, a girl had come walking down the gill. He said the girl walked past him. He turned round and grabbed her and told her not to scream. He said that he tied the girl's hands behind her back with the dog lead and then walked her back to his house, which is over half a mile.
Initially, John Taylor said that he only wanted to SA Leanne, as if that somehow made it better. In the struggle, Leanne fell off his bed and banged her head. But that was not true. During his July 2002 trial, John finally came clean. He had taken Leanne's life. The judge told him,
"After the death of this girl at your hands, you wanted deviancy with a girl of similar age. That not only demonstrates how dangerous you are, but also demonstrates your lack of remorse. Not by chance were you in this area for this purpose. You were not acting on impulse. You chose a secluded place and a vulnerable young girl who suited your purposes. This was as cold and calculating as can be imagined. You are a dangerous sadist. Your purpose in kidnapping this young girl was so that you could satisfy your perverted cravings. The suffering you caused her, and the suffering you continue to cause those who loved her, simply cannot be measured. You must expect to spend the rest of your life in custody."
There could be nothing to keep John Taylor away from a life imprisonment sentence, but by pleading guilty, Taylor avoided any more confessions. So Leanne's loved ones will never know the full story of what happened inside his house of horrors that day. Perhaps this is for the best. The knowledge that Leanne was tormented and unalived shortly after her 16th birthday is haunting enough for her family. Perhaps the full history of John Taylor is better left unsaid. But the other victims' families would beg to differ. At least 4 other women might have been taken away by this monster. And over 2 decades later, their grieving families are still desperate for answers. It's a disturbing thought that it takes one final slaying to uncover a serial predator. Why do innocent souls have to lose their lives for a monster to be caught? And why is it always the most innocent that have to go? Hey, thanks a lot for tuning in. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you know similar stories? Let me know in a comment down below. And before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. See you next time.